Hi everybody, my name is Steve Arsenault, and just before we have Vespers today, I thought we'd go over the icon of John the Baptist. And in the Orthodox Church, this icon is on the iconostasis because of John's important pivotal role in the beginning of Jesus' ministry. And it's always in this position here, which is the second one on the iconostasis from the gate, the royal gate. The second one over is John the Baptist. Now, we read in Genesis, first chapter of Genesis, that God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. And that means that we are all icons of God. The word icon in the image of God in the Greek is ikona, or icon. And so in the Orthodox Church like this, we have icons represented in the artwork, but we are also living icons. And so our relationship with God is iconographic. And this relationship is both a dialogue and a kind of love relationship. And throughout our life, we have this dialogue with God and with other people around us. So we are dialoguing with other icons, and we're working out what it means to be whole and complete as we were created in Genesis, okay, and how that gets returned. And if you read if you look back at the Theophany readings, particularly the royal hours, but also the Vespers before Theophany, you'll see all these readings that talk about return to our original state. And this icon is of John the Baptist. And of course, John the Baptist is down at the River Jordan, which is east of Jerusalem. And he's down in the desert area. It's about 1,200 feet below sea level, but that's neither here nor there, really. But at any rate, he's down there, and this icon describes who he is and what he does. Now, usually, you see the language of icons, there's a certain kind of language going on. And this language, the purpose of the language, is to bring us into communion with God. And I'm referring to a book by Coderus, who said, which is Icons and Communion. And he shows that by line and by colors, particularly lines, the function of the icon is to bring us into communion. Kinonikon, he brings into communion. Sometimes this word is called fellowship in the Protestant world. It is in communion with God. And so this is what's happening here. And in this icon, you see, he's facing towards Christ, so he's pointing the direction. And he says in his scroll here, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And this is a quote from the prophet Malachi. And Malachi in Hebrew means messenger. And in the Greek translation, that's angelos, messenger. You know, we have angels, messengers. And we have them here on these doors too, messengers. Usually they're messengers from above. They fly down and they give us messages, right? They fly back up to the heavenly dome, the heavenly firmament, the solid dome that the ancients believed in. But they flew back up into heaven to God and to be close to God, and came down and gave us messengers. And that's why John the Baptist has wings, because he is an angelos, he is a messenger of the covenant. And it's in Malachi, the last chapters of Malachi. You read that, you'll really get some good insight on this. And you notice that in the language of icons, first of all, there are always persons in icons, because icons are relating to personhood and persons. They're not pretty scenes. It's not decorative art as such, although the aesthetics does play a role, but it's not primarily that. It is a function to bring us into communion. And you can see here that he's a standing figure. He is in a dynamic pose, so he's in motion and doing things. He's not standing still like a stilt with his hands down, but he's in motion. He's doing something. He has his wings. You also see that there are mountains here. You see these mountains? I don't know if you can see them, but the mountains are pointing forward. Because in an icon, the perspective is the viewer. It isn't some distant area way, way back, so-called vanishing point in Western art. Sometimes it's called reverse perspective, but my guess is that Western art reversed what the ancient art did, which was to engage with the viewer. And in this case, that's the case. And you can see that there are mountains, and these mountains are coming out toward us, toward the viewer, because we are the point of the icon. We are the center point of the icon, okay? Now you notice also in iconography, and you see this in other ones too, I can point it out at a later time, but you can have action in two different things at the same time. So here is his head on a platter, and yet you see his head on his shoulders as a standing figure. And so, because in the story, you remember that John the Baptist was beheaded, and his head was placed on a platter and given to Herod on a platter. So that part of the story is shown in this at the same time, two heads at the same time. Now another thing you'll see is a tree down at the lower right-hand corner. This is not just a pretty decorative thing. There's an axe because in the Gospels, he says that any tree that does not produce good fruit will be cut down. And so there's the tree and there's the axe. Okay, so one other thing that this icon clearly demonstrates, and when you come to the church, come up close to it because you'll see it very, very clearly, the way the Mother Theodora, the iconographer, did this, is that in the bones in the arms and in his face is where the light colors show. Light in an icon, in the language of icons, does not come from the right or the left and shine on the person on one side, and then you get darkness on the other, so you get a kind of three-dimensional look, right? The light in the icon comes from within the person. And that is the light of Christ within, the light of God from within us shining forth. And so you'll see that the highlights in the skin, up here in his face, his neck, his arm, and his legs, you can clearly see that it's brighter than the surrounding tissue. And this expresses the Orthodox understanding of cleansing, illumination, and unity with God. Cleansing, illumination, and unity with God. That is the threefold process of Orthodox spirituality, and expressed clearly in the icon itself. So, do you have any questions or anything? I think that would probably do it for 10 minutes. The background? The gold, yes. Gold is used on icons because, of course, it has a wonderful sheen to it. but in a sense, the gold makes the background disappear. And so it's the sense that there is that there really isn't. Gold, of course, is lasting and doesn't tarnish, so really has is an eternal quality. Yeah, this is the proportions in the body are often quite odd to us because we don't see people quite like that. I had an iconographer tell me once that with his experience of monks on Mount Athos is that after a while, with all the fasting and prayers and stuff, their body really does change, and they do get some changes. But I would suspect that that there is some iconographic language going on with this. Realism is not a top priority in icons. Symbolism and the message and the gospel message and the message of unity with God is much more important message than realism, human realism. I'm sorry? Yeah, in iconography, when you see crosses, it's usually martyrs. And he's carrying a staff. Well, he is the first Christian, the last of the prophets, and the first of the Christian message. So just before Christ goes out in his ministry, it's John the Baptist, and people follow him and they think, "Are you the Messiah?" Right? And then he says, "No, there's one whose sandals I'm not worthy to untie." Yeah. So it's interesting because this goes along with what the icon of the theophany as well, which of course is the baptism. So I mean, together it kind of pulls together because it is John the Baptist. And there is one point I think in Paul's letters where he says, we're not partisans. I'm not of John. I'm not of Paul. I mean, we're all of Christ, one body with Christ. We're not of John the Baptist or Paul or whatever. But that's another thing. So we'll do more of these. There's more to be said. Icons are never, you see icons alone, but they're really part of a whole plurality of that constitutes the message of the gospel and Christianity. It's a plurality. And this is Trinitarian, of course, right? Because we're singular and plural. And you can't be a person just without others. So you have a plurality in some ways, in some kind of expression. There has to be the many and the one, and this is very Trinitarian. And yeah, Trinity actually, although Trinity, this is the appearance of the Trinity, right, at the baptism. However, the human experience is the principles of Trinity are principles of a very human existence. It comes from the bottom up. It's not a doctrine of the top that's dictated down, like a lot of Western, churches. They've got doctrines and they've got dogmas and principles and stuff like that, and the scholastics work it out, and then everybody has to believe this, and it comes from the top down. But in Orthodoxy, it's the bottom. The tendencies, there is scholasticism there. You have to have some of that, but it comes from the bottom up. It is our experience. You experience me as an individual, but when you talk to me, you're actually speaking to some guy who came from Boston, who has a family and has a wife and has a neighborhood and has, you see, and when I speak out of this plurality of experiences. I speak to you, and you do the same to me. So it's an individual one-on-one, but it's never one-on-one. It's always plurality and one-on-one at the same time. So that's Trinitarian, and it's very much part of human experience. Makes it a universal principle, really. It's articulated as a principle, but our very experience is in Trinity. Yeah, and of course he's a cousin of God, right? He's a cousin of Jesus, right? And Mary is the mother of God. He's the cousin of God, and James is the brother of God. Adelphos. I think that's his title in Greek. One word. So, anyway, that's the story of John the Baptist, and we'll get going with our Vespers and like that.